The following is a production of New Mexico State University.
Then, if we have time, we'll take questions from the audience. And if you run out of questions, we'll go back to our student panelists and give them more opportunity to ask questions. I'm not sure why somebody from the oil and gas industry is required to introduce nuclear energy speakers. I was in Spain. We were doing some geology over there several years ago, and we drove by a huge nuclear power plant, and there was a great big drilling rig right in the front parking lot drilling an oil well, and I thought that was the best use of a nuclear power plant that I'd ever seen. So I'm going to be an avid listener, and I hope, like you, that we will come to the conclusion this is a very smart thing for our country to be doing. I know that Senator Domenici has preached it and worked hard on it for many, many years. In times, a voice crying in the wilderness. And I only wished our country had listened to him a long time ago when he was that voice crying in the wilderness. I think a few more people are starting to listen to him, and we have two good speakers today that will help us think properly about this issue. Our first speaker is Ellen Ruff. She is as was mentioned earlier by the senator, she is now the president of in the Office of Nuclear Development for Duke Energy, a very well-known, highly respected energy seller, deliverer in the states, in the regions of the Carolinas. They buy natural gas from our company over in Artesia. We've dealt with them for a long time, and it's fun to have this little loop in my life. But they not only deliver natural gas, they deliver electricity, and they use, of course, nuclear energy to generate some, and they're trying to use more. Ellen is a very interesting person. She started out as an attorney. She went to Simmons College, a women's college in Boston, and after graduating from there, ended up at the University of North Carolina, where she got her law degree. She told me that she was an Army brat. I tried to find out where she grew up, and that when somebody says Army brat, that means everywhere. And but she had a rapid path of advancement. Her capabilities shown early, and she moved up through the lawyer ranks in Duke, and finally got tired of trying to solve problems created by those people in operations, and decided to go into operations and create problems herself. And so she is now doing that, and we welcome her. We welcome her input. She is a proud mother of a daughter and two sons, and we're very happy to have you, Ellen, here in New Mexico. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I am delighted to be here. I'm going to try to put on my microphone tactfully, because I tend to walk around when I speak. It's a real honor for me to be here today. I know you all think of Senator Domenici as the senator from New Mexico, but we in the nuclear industry, we think of him as our senator. So it is a privilege for me to be here and to talk to you about nuclear power. It's wonderful to think about a rapid progression in the company, but the truth is it took 30 years for me to get from where I was to where I am today. And just to mention a little bit, both, I'm going to stick, I thought it was very good. We're going to talk about facts. I'm going to talk about facts related to, from the perspective of a company that not only has existing reactors, but we are trying to license new reactors. We are also very active in the field of renewables. We're active in the field of energy efficiency. And lo and behold, we have coal plants, which we will talk about. But just for a moment, in my last job, which was only a year ago, I was the president of Duke Energy Carolinas, which is the old Duke Power in the Carolinas. We serve in the Piedmont Carolinas. And I would go around, we were building a coal plant, and most of the discussions and speeches that I would give, lots of them in universities and colleges, I don't care what the subject was, what we talked about were the coal plants. And what I discovered was in conversations, because when you don't have like nuclear development or coal in your title, people tend to talk more broadly. And what I discovered is people would actually ask and say, why would you want to build a coal or a nuclear plant when you could build a windmill? And that is a true story, not an uneducated person, college educated. And what I discovered was that the vast majority of folks that I would talk to, other than the geeky people inside the company or in the industry, or Alex and I will talk to each other, or we talk in conferences about nuclear. The vast majority of people don't have a sense of how electricity is made, the challenges that it presents, the time that it takes to do it, and the cost. And we are now today at a wonderful time, at least for me, in the energy industry, I think for Alex as well, where we have the opportunity to make some very important decisions in the energy industry. And we do need to make them as a country. Somebody asked me at lunch, what is your message? Do you have your message? Are you getting it out on nuclear? And towards the end of my conversation, and you'll probably hear the theme of my message, but it is something when we talk about, does Congress have, can we count on them to do what they need to do? My question will be, do we have the will as a country and as a region to make important and significant decisions around energy, and in particular around nuclear power? Because when we talk about today and we talk about carbon, Duke Energy and its philosophy, you'll hear on the next slide our chairman's sort of aspirations. And that is, and that's going to be about Duke, and that's fine, but what we're talking about is we believe we need to modernize our system. If we have carbon legislation at the federal level, and even if we don't, what we are very sure of is that the EPA will certainly come forward to monitor the emissions from coal. Mercury, NOx, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide. And we are going to have to move forward to, quote, modernize our fleet. And for Duke, it's particularly important. We served in the Carolinas for 100 years. When we merged with Synergy in the Midwest, 150 years of service and 4 million customers. Our fleet in the Carolinas, 50% of the energy that we get comes from nuclear, and 50% comes from coal. And in the Midwest, over 90% of the energy for our Midwest customers comes from coal. And what we know today is that if we have legislation in the form of either cap and trade or a carbon tax, it's going to add to the cost of our coal fleet so substantially that what we will be looking at is modernizing our fleet. What does that mean? It means those 40 and 60-year-old coal plants that we have and the ones that don't have scrubbers, because in North Carolina we passed what's called the Clean Smokestacks Bill, and Duke in the Carolinas has spent over $2 billion to put either scrubbers or SCRs on our coal plants, but not on every one, because some of them are 40 and 60 years old, don't have the footprint to put the equipment on, and so we will look at retiring those over time, and they have to be replaced. So we look and we see 150 years, 4 million customers. We're big. We are big. 35,000 megawatts in generating capacity in the United States. We have 4,000 megawatts actually in South America. Most of that, over 3/4 of that, is hydroelectric. But we're looking hard at modernizing our fleet, increasing the efficiency. Energy efficiency is a key component of what we will do. And we are looking at how to get from here to there on nuclear. We didn't have an Office of Nuclear Development until the first of this year. And the main reason was because whereas we have 7 units, operating units in nuclear. We hadn't built one in a long time. And we know that we can do smart grid, which is how you digitize your system, make it more efficient. We do really want our customers to use less electricity because we don't want to have to build more than we need to. Because in point of fact, those customers will pay for it, and in tough economic times, you don't want to charge those customers more than you need to build these plants. Having said that, I spent a lot of time on the stump for economic development. And when we talk about using gas and how we use gas, because when we look today in our planning process, how do we decide what we need for our customers? What is it that we're going to build? We're regulated. So we're regulated by utilities commissions in the state. And most of our regulation that deals with how much, what we build and how much we charge comes from state utilities commissions where you have to go and ask, may we build? And here's what we do. Every year we do an integrated resource plan and we look and compare the cost of generation. And that cost of generation, in general, when you do it, very complicated. We fight over it all the time. Qualitative, quantitative analysis. This year when we did it, looking at the cost and the estimates for nuclear, and I'm going to talk about that just towards the end in terms of our new plant, shows that nuclear is to the benefit of our customer in every scenario that we looked at. And it is compared to the cost of a gas plant. When you think about plants and comparisons, the capital costs associated with nuclear are huge. When you measure the value of a plant over time, you look at not only the capital cost to build, you look at the fuel. We license our plants for 40 years or 60 years. The original plants that were built in the 80s were 40 years. We've extended the life to 60. And the new ones, assuming they get built, will be 60 years. So we look at the capital costs, look at the fuel over that 60 years, and you say, how do they compare on the front? Building gas has very low capital costs on the front end. You can pop them up in 18 months. And if gas is low price as it is today, it's a bargain. Of course, your customers that use gas as feedstock in their industrial and commercial processes are not so happy to see you use gas, generally speaking, to generate electricity. Drives the price up and uses up the feedstock, and you need a pipeline. Here that may not be a problem. In North Carolina, you have to have it come right to the plant and have full service all the time. But we compared it to gas, every single scenario. The nuclear was cheaper. So let's slide that. I'm very bad about slides, I have to tell you. If we can go to the next slide and let's see if it's got a picture. Here we are. Told you about our aspirations and what we want to do. And making our communities energy efficient. And let me be clear, when we go out and talk about energy efficiency and renewables, we are the most popular person standing on the podium in general. Because you know all those people that may not be focused on how we make electricity? Renewables and windmills, they sound so good, and energy efficiency sounds great as well. For the first time this year, by the way, in our integrated resource plan, we did not include a new coal plant. Didn't even bother to include one and compare it with price. Because the anticipation is, if you have a carbon tax, the goal of that carbon tax, in general, is to use less coal. I mean, it's, crystal clear. And in past analysis, coal on our fleet always came out ahead. You have 40 to 60-year-old plants that are completely depreciated, and you can run them all the time. There's no comparison, because gas plants in general have a lower, what we call a capacity factor, which really isn't important, other than how much they run. But I spent 2 years stumping for a coal plant. We may be one of the last companies in the country building a new two coal plants. One is an IGCC plant in Indiana, where we're hopeful to be able to do carbon sequestration, which is pumping it under the ground. But we should all be clear, there is no large commercial development in place today that says that the sequestration is something that is both economic and that can be done. And so for just a moment on facts, you have to wonder, for a country that has spent the last 20 years paying to bury high-level waste at Yucca Mountain, our customers have paid on their bills, and everyone who has a nuclear plant with customers, those customers have paid for the right to bury that waste. And we all know, sitting here today, we're not going to do that at Yucca Mountain. So for carbon and the gas that goes into the atmosphere that we're concerned about, it says we have to feel comfortable in burying it. Just me, but I worry about that, because we need a plan and a roadmap going forward so we can make decisions as a country. So let's go to the next slide and talk a minute about, and move from that one too, if you would please. Thank you. Just go to the next slide, because I want to get to talk about our fleet. So we have 7 pressurized water reactors, 7,000 megawatts of capacity on our system. First plant, one of the oldest, is at Oconee, came on in '74. The other 2 came on in the mid-'80s. I came to work in 1978 at the company as a lawyer and worked on selling ownership interest in one of those plants so we could get it built. We ran out of money, cash, in the '70s when we had this huge construction program to build these nuclear plants. But we had the person as our chair who was a true leader in the nuclear industry, Bill Lee, who started NPO, who's worked on 3 Mile Island after the accident there, and he had a vision for what he wanted our fleet to look like for the long term, for the benefits of economic development. But in the mid-'80s, we canceled 6 units, and we didn't build them. So we talked about it. 50% of Duke Energy Carolina's generation comes from nuclear. Our rates are more than 30% below the national average in the Carolinas. And that is in part largely because we have nuclear plants that came on in the '80s. We have very little gas in our portfolio, and we are very attractive to customers who want to come there. We made decisions in the '70s for plants that came on in the mid-'80s. We built them through the NRC licensing process that existed then. Took a long time to do it, but look what we have today. So what it takes for us today is we look at our capacity factor, and that just means how much does it run. And for nuclear, it's about 91.5%. That's how much you can count on it to contribute to your needs for electricity. They run flat out, 24/7. We call them baseload plants, and they run all the time. You can compare that capacity factor. Coal is about 72%. Wind is 30%, and solar is 20%. Now, from Duke's perspective, we believe all of the 5 fuels have a place in the portfolio, including coal. And we believe nuclear is very important because when it operates, it is the only carbon-free resource when operating, just like hydro and wind. Not hydro, but wind and solar and hydro. No carbon when it operates, and it runs all the time. So when you look at that, and when the person says to you, why would you build that nuclear plant instead of a windmill? That is the start of a very, very long conversation. And the truth is, we aren't very good about, haven't had to, talk in the public about what is a very complicated subject, which is how electricity is made. And how many people would really want to just go to the switch and turn it on and have it be there and have it be cheap as it can be, and I think today clean. Very interested in the environment today, because when we used to plan 10 years ago, and in most states today, the standard for what you build is a least cost planning standard. What is the cheapest to build? We've had changes in that over the years, and as we've gone to renewable portfolio standards, we've had changes that we've made policy decisions that I think are good ones. But we have decided for ourselves, by and large, not everyone has decided, and that is an issue, that we will make policy decisions around electricity. So we thought, burning platform, nuclear, carbon-free, we can jump right on that, and what a wonderful story that is. And we said, let us talk to you about the benefits of nuclear, which I think are on the next slide. It's reliable, it's base load, which means it runs all the time, helps us decarbonize our fleet. We talk about modernizing the generating fleet, which is actually more code for retiring your coal plants. I mean, that's just what it is, because we don't think we'll be able to run them. It's not that we think we shouldn't, because we think you can have state-of-the-art, clean, pulverized coal plants. But I think as a nation, we're not clear that we really want to do that. We have a rate case, which means we're going in to raise rates. You're going to keep me honest, Eddie, aren't you? How long have I been? I'm all right? Okay. We have a rate case now in North Carolina, which means you go in and you say, here's our costs. Ask the Utility Commission to allow us to raise our rates. We have not had a rate increase in North Carolina since 1991. We've spent over $4 billion, so we're going in and asking for it. 90% of the public hearings that we're having are not about the rates, they're about the Cliffside coal plant that's under construction. Job creation and economic development, what jobs are created. And so we said, you know, what is it about this message that just doesn't make you want to run out and build those plants? Why isn't it absolutely obvious when you say new nuclear plants, each one of them will create 1,400 to 1,800 construction jobs, 400 to 700 permanent jobs. These are high-paying jobs. In the Carolinas, we've lost textile industry hand over fist in the last 5 years. Never coming back. Manufacturing, when they're cutting up their, taking the machinery and shipping it to South America to make fabric, it's not coming back. Jobs are a good story, but you know what? They're not jobs today or tomorrow. They're not creating the jobs for insulation or the immediate jobs that we all want. They're creating long-term and sustaining jobs. Is that enough? No. Generates approximately, a nuclear plant, $430 million in sales of goods and services in the local community if you have one. Alex can tell you, we can tell you, you do surveys, people who love us the most, the ones that live right beside our plants. And the secondary effect, of course, I'm sure no one cares about this, what it generates in property taxes if you have one in your neighborhood. So we thought, what is it about all this that's not enough? Once again, why are we not out there saying, let's build those nuclear plants? Clean, good jobs, good neighbor, economic development, customers for the future in 15 years, a solid base of electric generation that will be low rates in a time frame that will draw customers to you. with an appropriate mix of energy efficiency, renewables. All of those need to be a part of it. So in 2005, even before the issues of cap and trades, we said, next slide please, we're going to go out and we're going to try, we'll file with the NRC for a license for a 2-unit plant, AP 1000 Westinghouse. This is in South Carolina. And we filed with the NRC. And we finally were able to give them an estimate of what we thought it would cost, which you'd think would be simpler, but it's not. And so we gave them an $11 billion estimate for these 2 units. You all here in this area have one of the largest, the Palo Verde. It's over 3,000 megawatts. It's owned by 7 entities, I think? Jointly owned little pieces. Has it always run perfectly? Probably not. Has any plant always run perfectly? Probably not. But been running long enough, and the NRC's come back in, we have an excellent process. In the 80s, some people say, what's the difference between the 80s and now when you canceled all those units? Then, issue of safety, raised regularly and often. We've had 20 plus almost 30 years of safe operations of nuclear in this country. Have it. You always knock on wood. Safe operations. Yucca Mountain high-level waste in the 80s, an enormous issue. Tried to make great strides. And for us, the place we have arrived at as a company position is, do we think we should have it? Absolutely. Do we have to have it? We don't. We can provide for it on site, safely, long term. But there is the third reason, and the thing that hasn't changed, and that's the cost. Most of your opponents for nuclear power that oppose coal plants and will oppose nuclear will say we won't have to do very much because the cost will kill it. Because of the price per megawatt compared to other capital costs to build it and not taking into account those 40 years. Because you know what? When you look at it, start to finish, our original date was 2018 for operation of our plant. We've now changed it to 2021. 48 months to license the plant. Go through the regulation at the NRC, it's 48 months. And that's if things are really moving well, that you don't have changes in the design. AP 1000 is a certified design, sort of. Because there are always changes, you discover ways to make it run better. 48 months and then 48 months to build it. Or 4 more years. It's 8 to 10 years to bring a plant online. And $11 billion of dead capital for a long period of time when you might be putting in those gas plants for a lot less and running those, but they don't provide the value in the longer term. And we need to learn how to talk about that and make it obvious, because all those things beforehand, when you get to this and you get to the money, it's a showstopper. It's a showstopper for Wall Street, who looks, we have a pretty big balance sheet, about $15 billion. But that's an $11 billion plant if we own it alone. So we weren't as smart as you all out here in terms of, we have one plant jointly owned by our wholesale customers. But we have been talking about something called regional generation, where the utilities, you can ask me what's regional, I've been changing my definition, I'm trying to broaden it just in case. But you'd think it might be the utilities that were going to need plants, and to add generation in the next time frame, we need to get together and build them together. Not so easy. Got to check every ego you have at the door. Got to decide governance. But if you do that, you bring it in, you bring a plant at 2,200 megawatts in, if you each own a piece of it, when it comes online, you have a smaller piece. So you build them in stages. You have one that comes in 2016 and 18, you have one that comes in 2021 and 25. It means your customers will pay less of the cost, and at the end of the time frame will have as much generation, but it's not easy. And you must have the right legislation in your states for how you will recover that money. It means you've got to be able to have the dreaded word, or phrase, which is construction work in progress, which means we collect from our customers the financing costs on the front end before the plant comes online. 4 states do this now. Might be 3. Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and Virginia has something like that. And if we have it out in here, I felt when I came out here, I don't know enough about what's happening in this area. We're so kind of consumed, you know, heads down. But I will tell you one thing, everything that's good for nuclear elsewhere is good for nuclear all over. We need successes in there being built. But it's the money. And legislation in the states that will support you building it. We thought that was our idea, but it's Wall Street's. So we need state legislation in every state. That's a big task when the most vocal people in general are the people who don't want it. It means we have to get the support from our state legislators, and we sure would like more support on the federal level. But I can see that Alex is going to make that happen for us, right? It is a huge task. And, you know, my last slide deals with Midwest generation, and we are not building a nuclear plant in the Midwest, although it would have been hard to know that. We are trying to do a clean energy park. We have an alliance in the Midwest, in Portsmouth or Piketon, Ohio. You know, the Midwest doesn't have much nuclear. At least in our case in the Southeast, the customers know the benefit of it. Most of what the Midwest knows is failure. Canceled plants, no money. So we're trying to go through DOE to get a grant to clean up what is a former weapons site, get an early site permit, and clean it up, and hopefully build a plant there that will help us modernize the Midwest system. So here's my message. All those things you see about nuclear and the benefits it brings to the environment and how clean it is, those are all true. And run well and built well, and we have improved our licensing system, notwithstanding my complaining about the 48 months. Used to be you got a construction permit, built it, then you had to get an operating license, and everything was at risk. Now at least it's a combined operating license, but it's still slow compared to the rest of the world, and there's my final point. We don't manufacture the components for nuclear in this country. Most of what we had in the 80s has gone overseas. One place in the world makes the largest components of nuclear, and that's in Japan. So depending on how many plants we say we need in this country, it means we have to make a decision, get in the queue, spend the money, get in the queue to wait your turn. We're very slow. We need to be deliberate. We need to find the will to make the decisions or decide we don't want to, which I think would be a huge mistake for the country and for economic development. But I'm not queen. I don't get to make those decisions. But my message is find the will, refine the processes, and hopefully figure out a way to bring some of the manufacturing components back to this country. Because if we don't, we'll all be in the queue. Tom Friedman had an article in the New York Times today, and I'm going to finish, where he was talking about solar panels. And he was talking about applied materials. And all of the factories he has, of the 7, none of them are in this country. So if we think we're in a renaissance of whichever kind, solar, nuclear, we need to find a way to help control our destiny and move forward. We need to make a decision. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
I'll stay right here.
We'll now take a couple of questions. Do we have first question from our student panelists? Please introduce yourself.
See, now you have people.
Thanks for giving me this chance to ask you a question. United States at present produce 20% of the electricity from nuclear power, but France around 80%. I want to know that why United States is behind. What's the reason for this?
Such a good question. They're 80% because the state supports nuclear. EDF is a state-owned facility in France. Areva is partially owned. The French government supports nuclear. They also reprocess fuel, which we obviously do not do in this country, which would reduce nuclear waste considerably, but we decided not to do in the 80s. It's about the money. The state supports it in the same way that solar and others are supported in other countries.
Hello, my name is Amanda Alaniz. I'm a graduate student here in the economics program. You talk about all the economic benefits, and those you can see really well. And everybody likes to have more money in their pockets at the end of the day. And you can see the environmental benefits as well. But you never hear about anyone talking about, what you're doing with the waste and what the plan is for that. And what I'd really like to know is how sustainable is it to store that waste at these plants?
It's not as sustainable as if you could have stored them at Yucca Mountain. But we need to do two things in my belief. First of all, we need to reduce the amount of waste we have. And if we were able to reprocess, which, by the way, as Alex can tell you, we now call recycle, much more politic to call it recycle than reprocess the fuel, you would reduce the amount of waste that you had to because you'd reuse it in the recycling, and you'd have much less. There's something and so we need to do that, and I believe it would be helpful to have a central repository to move it. But we need to decide that we're willing to do that. In each of the generation models that we have, they have a disadvantage to them. We didn't have time to talk about that today, but with solar, to accomplish the same amount of megawatts of electricity, the size of the solar farms that you would have would be huge. Huge. And so you have issues of land use. And then with wind, similarly, North Carolina, the best place to have wind farms is on the top of our ridge, Grandfather Mountain on the western part of the state, and we have what's called a ridge law that doesn't permit it because people want to be able to use it as a tourist attraction as well. We can make steps in all of those and should. Someone has said, is it sustainable? There's yes. And is it safe? Yes. It has a flavor to it that none of us like, but if we look at every single kind of generation, there is something that's not perfect. It's the best we have.
We have a question here.
Yes, sir. My name is Bob Bekender, and I've been a student. In fact, I was enrolled in school for a long time. But do you think that one of the major parts of the problem is a PR problem because people take their information out of the Book of Gore? And CO2, carbon, nuclear has gotten a bad rap. No radiation really ever left 3 Mile Island.
Right.
So, and I go back a long ways. I wrote the syllabus and trained the DOD's first nuclear emergency teams in 1957. So I've done a lot of this junk.
What I would say to that is we are sometimes our own worst enemy on PR. I think whether or not we believe the facts, whether we believe, global warming, man contributes to it, from the company's position, what we have decided is we need to deal with it as an issue. And if there were some other name, as someone said to me, we could call nuclear other than nuclear, it would be beneficial if you could think of a nice name. Clean energy, whatever, not renewable. But nuclear, there are folks sitting in this room that are my age, your age. We remember 3 Mile Island. There's a lot of residual. I think new generation perhaps in our students who are concerned about carbon will feel less that way. But I think we haven't learned to talk about it effectively and talk about what its benefits are. Lots of people are really bored by electricity. I know that sounds odd. It's an issue, right?
I'd like to point out that name change in the oil field. I don't know, going back 30 years, we've used nuclear magnetic resonance tools to measure rock qualities down in a wellbore, 10,000, 30,000, 20,000 feet, with an 8-inch hole in the ground. We can't go down and look at it. And they figured out they could use that same tool to measure certain properties in the human body, but the nuclear word, they got rid of it and they call it the MRI.
Right.
How many of you have heard of an MRI and gladly get one when you need one? It's a nuclear tool. But what a great salesman job that was to change that name.
Call it magnetic reactors.
I think that's what you ought to do. We have a question from our Congressman Lujan.
I'm just wondering how far, I haven't been involved in it for a long time, but how far along are we on standardizing, like, you know, have GE build one and Westinghouse another one, and that's all we use? Or
We're better, much better than we were, I would say, in developing the standardized design. A lot of times, though, when you're putting them in a brownfield site, one already built, where you have a plant, you make modifications to it, and it's like when you bring a already built something to your house, there are usually changes to be made. Much better than it was. And when the NRC finally certifies a design, that will be extremely helpful when they do it. You have at least three, the AP1000, which is Westinghouse, Arriva's EPR, which is fully contained. They've had some cost problems of their own. And then ABWR, GE, which one? I think it's GE, but I'm not sure. But much better, not close enough. And one of the things that hasn't happened is B&W's talked about making little ones, 200 size, not cost effective. But you know, one of the things that's a problem for nuclear is how long it takes you to build it. 10 years. It'd be nice to have some modular designs that were certified for smaller companies, smaller cap companies that you could use. But safety will always be an issue. Have to take care of it, and when you add on the systems that you need to a little tiny 200 megawatt plant, it usually runs it right out of the market. I think we should work on that from my personal perspective. Yes?
We have a question here.
Wish I hadn't done that so publicly. I'm Terry Cole. I'm President and CEO for the Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce. I wanted to make a comment, and then I'll have a follow-up question. But you go, girl. I love the fact that you are bold, you are straightforward, you say nuclear without whispering it, and I think that's a very good thing.
Thank you.
So keep at it, because it goes to sort of my question, and that is, I think part of the problem with this whole nuclear discussion across the country is that those people who tend to support it, and there are many, whisper it.
That's right.
And they have been very, very timid about their support. And I think when people in the business community hear that shyness about this topic, it does a real disservice to the public policy debate that really needs to begin to unfold in this country straightforwardly, boldly, and let's get on with the dialogue that needs to happen. I guess I'd like to know how you think we can get there, because I think part of the solution to the debate comes from within, the people who are supporting it.
And I thank you for those comments, and I agree with you. And I will tell you for my own self, and just in that comment of the whispering, I came through the 80s. Sometimes when you speak loudly, the people that come out are not your supporters, they're the opponents. Nationally, across the board, they're drawn to you very quickly. I think it is important for the business community, for the chambers, to come out and say how important it is, because when we say it, sometimes they say, well, the way you make your money is by spending $11 billion and then you get a return on it, because that's the way utilities traditionally make their money, is by investing it, putting it in rate base, and getting a return. And so sometimes we are not viewed as, let's just say, as self-serving, or viewed as self-serving, and sometimes not as credible. I think we need assistance in talking about it, and we have been trying to do that, at least in the Carolinas, to get support from other than just ourselves and God bless NEI. But when Alex comes around and I come around with the nuclear name in my title, we become just slightly less credible than we were before.
Dean Carruthers has just told me he's next.
I'm a little nervous about that.
This is a curiosity to me, that you could go 19 or 20 years without a rate increase, and you have some of the lowest power rates in the area. And I saw up there you were a multi-billion-dollar company traded on the stock exchange, and you have all of these expansionary plans. What's the secret to doing that, to be so successful financially without having power rate increases? We'd like to learn that here in New Mexico somehow.
You have very good rates here in New Mexico, I must say. But here's the answer for us. 2 words through the 90s. Load growth. We spent money, but load growth. We added more customers to whom we sold our product, more revenues coming in than we had going out. Even with and in the 90s, through that time frame, our capital construction was not what it is now with the coal plant and the gas plants. And today, our load growth is flat. Energy efficiency, bad, the economy, load growth, LOAD, load growth, more customers coming to the Carolinas, added to the system, hooked up to the electricity, adding to the top line, and we were very careful in conserving our costs, which are the only 2 ways you make money. More on the top line, take care of your costs.
We have time for one quick question, one more. Oh, I'm sorry, 2 more. Senator, please go ahead. I'll tell you what, let her do hers first, and then we'll let you finish. How's that? Please go ahead.
All right, thank you. Is it on? Okay. Hi, my name is Crystal Moran. I'm a student here. I was wondering, what are your perceptions on how error-proof you think nuclear power is, or a nuclear plant is?
How error-proof?
Yeah.
You'll have some. You'll have some errors. Some will be made. You mean in its operations?
In its operations, as
Yeah.
far as, how many times does a plant need to blow up before we decide that nuclear power isn't the way to go?
That's a very important question. And, I think we have been fortunate in this country not to have had those, kinds of occasions in the last 25 or 30 years. But we've had near misses. But we have here in this country, for all my whining about being slow, we have redundant safety systems in our plants. We have rigorous examinations by the NRC. We have our own industry groups that are self-evaluating. And we do everything, more so than in most plants, other types of generation, to be sure they are safe because of the consequences of what you're talking about. But the truth is, and Bill Lee, our chairman after 3 Mile Island, he was on Good Morning America. I watched his tape, and this was back, Lord, in 1980. And they said, well, couldn't someone die from a nuclear explosion? And the answer, a nuclear accident or something that occurs, he said, absolutely. And it could happen at any kind of generating plant that you have. But because the potential for it to be more widespread, we are relentless on safety in this country. And I mean relentless. When I first came to work at Duke, I was 30 years old. I shouldn't have said that. But I said, oh, I don't know if I want to work here. I don't really like nuclear power. I'd seen the various and sundry. And they said, well, in a year, if you still feel that way, you probably should look for another job. And I saw how our company did it, and then how the industry did it, and really how relentless, that's the word I would use, in terms of safety. But we should all always be concerned about that question. So it's a good one. Thank you.
Senator Domenici, please.
Yeah, I want to make an observation. I'd like you to just fill it in if you could. I think you know the facts better than I, but it would seem to me that right now the United States is paralyzed in terms of decision-making as to where we're going to get our electricity in the future. And we're fortunate because this paralysis has occurred while we're having a recession and while we're really getting pretty good at a little better at efficiency.
Yep.
So you add all that up, there has not been any real demand on the utility companies to get on with building added capacity. We're talking a lot about it, but we aren't doing it. We've got the EPA with the CO2 problem. We've got the other, what are we going to do about coal? But it would appear to me that this period of abeyance of sitting here and not making decisions, it's going to leave sooner or later. And we're going to be in a position where we're not necessarily ready for the kind of decisions for what are we going to permit to add the electricity that we need. Is that halfway cockeyed or right? Or
Is absolutely correct. And it takes, once you make the decision, a long time. And parts of the country are challenged knowing they will need generation. And in this part of the country, you've dealt with issues of water and new generation. And that, Senator, will be a huge issue for all kinds of generation, not just nuclear. But we are right now in this phase where demand is low, and what is being said is you don't need any more of these plants on the opposing side. But we know our fleet with 40 and 60 and 70-year-old coal plants is going to have to be modernized and replaced. This is an opportunity for us to focus on the debate, but we can't talk about it forever. We've got to make a decision. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you.
On behalf of New Mexico State and the Domenici Institute, we would like to present you with two gifts. The first one is a bottle of water.
Thank you so much. Good segue.
Please don't forget how valuable a resource that is out here.
We do.
And secondly is a beautiful piece of tile work.
So awesome.
That isn't this something?
I would have been distracted had I
It's a
seen.
Domenici commemorative tile that was done by Virginia Romero. I don't know if any of you know about her, but it's a beautiful piece. And if you get a chance, come by her chair later on and take a look at this. And this is for you to take home.
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
The preceding was a production of New Mexico State University. The views and opinions in this program are those of the author and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the NMSU Board of Regents.